I'm a former pupil of AKS Alumna, and I'm a current women's rugby player with Sale Sharks Women, where we play in the Alliance Premier 15s League. So the Premier 15s is the highest level of women's rugby competition in this country, and it allows us the opportunity to play against all the big names of women's rugby, and also rugby in general, so your Saracens, your Harlequins. So I'm very fortunate to be able to do this week upon week, especially in the current climate. So I started playing rugby, even though it's always been seen as a male-dominated sport. I started playing rugby age 6 because I've got an older brother who played, and decided that it wasn't fair that he got to have all the fun and for me to stand on the sideline and watch. So I decided to get involved age 6 with the under-7s team up at Fylde. So growing up, there's always been challenges playing rugby, because quite often I'd be the only girl on the team. Quite often I'd also be the only girl on the rugby pitch. So I've got multiple memories of occasions where we'd be playing against an opposition, and some of the parents and some of the coaches would shout saying "go for the girl," thinking that the girl on a rugby team would be a sign of a weakness. And I hope that I put that wrong. I hope that I put that idea to rest, because by the end of the game, quite often they'll be shouting "stay away from the girl, stay away from the girl," because unbeknownst to them, tackling was actually my favourite part of rugby, and still is to this day. So as a young girl growing up playing rugby, I found it quite difficult to relate to rugby, because of its male-dominated roots. For example, we all know that the men's team stormed to victory in 2003, but it was a lot less well publicised that the women's team won the World Cup in 2014, and even less publicised that the women's team were the runners-up in the World Cup in 2010, which was actually held on English soil. So in 2010, I was 11 years old, and I can't remember hearing a single thing about how there was a World Cup for women's rugby being held in the UK. And I also remember when in 2014, when the women's team won the World Cup, that was the first time I'd ever seen a women's rugby game on the television. So growing up as a girl playing rugby, there were never any role models that I could relate to, that I could really look up to, because of a lack of media information and a lack of televised women's rugby games. So trying to aspire to be a women's rugby player, it wasn't really something that I could do, because there was no visibility of the women's game. Fortunately though, in the past 10 years, there's been a massive uptake on women's rugby, and especially with the league that I'm playing in now, it's only growing from strength to strength, which I think was something that we're extremely fortunate for. So not only was this lack of awareness and lack of publicity a thing just within the media, it was also within actual events as well. So for example, my family and I went to the London Sevens in 2012, and I remember seeing that there was women's rugby on the programme, which I was delighted about, and seeing how there was a completely separate women's rugby tournament. However, whilst all the men's games were held one by one in Twickenham, in the actual stadium, the majority of the women's rugby games were actually held on pitches just outside, with the exception of the semi-final and the final. So seeing that the women's rugby games weren't given the same platform as the men's game was something that I was really upset about. And when we eventually realised that the women's rugby games were happening elsewhere, most of the matches had already been played by that point. So despite this, I've been really fortunate to see in the last couple of years that there's been a real uptake in women's rugby. There's been a lot more interest shown in the media publications and social media engagement, and believe the game's now growing from strength to strength. With the new league that was established 3.5 years ago, the Premier 15s, it's allowed for more engagement online. A lot of the games are now live streamed as well, whereas even 2 or 3 years ago, this wasn't happening. So really, it was just about how the women's games weren't being given the same platform or the same opportunity to generate awareness as the men's games. So despite all of these experiences, they never put me off playing rugby, because ultimately I played because I enjoyed it. I played because it made me feel strong, powerful, confident, all of those things, and I played it because it was something that gave me a lot of enjoyment. And that's always been a theme from whenever I started playing rugby to even now. As long as I've been enjoying myself, that's all that's mattered. I believe recently as well, over the past couple of years, the women's game has been rightfully receiving increased recognition, and it's definitely the recognition that it deserves. There are a lot of inspiring and influential people who play, and a lot of people, in fact most people who play, also hold down full-time jobs. So for example, I've played before alongside people who are full-time doctors, vets as well. Some people are in the army or the military, and still they're playing semi-professional rugby, training 5 times a week and sometimes playing at the weekend as well, whilst holding down these jobs. So being able to be around these sorts of people as well is massively inspiring. And some people that I've managed to meet through playing rugby, for example, Jill Burns, who's currently the Lancashire chairwoman of rugby. She was England captain in the 1980s, and she was a big supporter and a big influence of when I was playing at Fairwood Waterloo. Other people such as Katie Dale-McLean, who I currently play alongside at Sale Sharks. Katie won the World Cup in 2014 and was the captain of the World Cup winning side. So being able to be around these people in this sort of environment is something that I'm extremely privileged to have. And growing up as well alongside many players who now have started to make it onto the big stage, playing for England in 7s and 15s. I'm really privileged to see the progress that they've made, and obviously for them to be a part of my life as well. And what's really exciting with this increased recognition as well, and the platform that we're now being given, is that hopefully we can start to inspire the next generation. So as I said previously, I didn't have any role models for women's rugby role models growing up. So hopefully with this new platform and the recognition that the game's starting to rightfully deserve, we can inspire and influence the next generation of women's rugby players to come through. And as the game's growing from strength to strength, hopefully we can build on that and obviously take it to new heights in the future too. So alongside playing rugby, I'm also a rugby coach myself. And one of my big aims is trying to get more women and girls involved in rugby and enjoying their rugby. So when I talk about providing a role model or providing role models for these next generation of players coming through, I think it's so important to do so, because then obviously you start to get that increased uptake and increased recognition that we're really driving for. I mean, from when I was, say, in the under 15s and under 18 squads growing up, I remember sometimes it'd be very difficult to get players coming down and joining them with rugby. Whereas now, sometimes I go to some rugby clubs and they've got a large women and girls section, which is fantastic. And obviously that's then a result of everything that's been going on inside the women's rugby world and everything that's been promoted and people being put on a platform to then become role models. And I think that's really exciting personally. I believe social media has a big involvement as well. For example, recently there's been a lot of campaigns put through on social media, such as the Can't See, Can't Be campaign, which basically is, it encourages people to give that recognition to those female athletes, and it doesn't necessarily stop at athletes either. It could be other women involved with things that are typically male-dominated areas, such as engineering, and just giving them the recognition and the platform to then hopefully inspire others. So if you can't see it, then obviously how do you know that you can be it? And I'm a big believer in that as well. Especially because of the influential and the powerful women that I've managed to meet through playing rugby, and also just in other sports in general, just being able to be able to talk with other people in other sports too, then we can empower ourselves. I think ultimately I've been extremely privileged to have played for the clubs that I've played for, and to have played at the level and had the experiences that I've had so far in my career, and I'm only 21, so hopefully I've got a little bit of time to go as well. I've been extremely fortunate to have been involved with the England under-20 setup a couple of years ago, and in terms of my career as a player, it really is an invaluable experience, and being able to be involved with the calibre of players and the calibre of coaches that I've been able to associate with, it's just something that I never really believed or really thought that I could achieve. I'm certainly very grateful to have had support from both school and parents and family and friends um, throughout my career so far, and hopefully that'll continue obviously for the rest of my rugby career. But I'm very fortunate to have been put into positions where I've been able to compete for these places and these teams and to play at the levels that I've been able to play at. So for that, I'm extremely grateful for. So growing up, this would happen not a lot, but if I ever went on a rugby camp or a football camp and my friends weren't necessarily picking the teams, quite often I'd be one of the last people left to be chosen onto a side because a lot of the time it would be, oh, there's a girl, I'm going to pick all the boys ahead of her. And then quite often by the following day they'd realise that actually this girl can play sport and play football, rugby or whatever the sport was pretty well, and then I wasn't often left to being the last person to be picked onto a side. But I mean, even as I got older, sometimes, especially in a workplace, I was asked whether we played full contact rugby or if we have scrums and lineouts playing rugby, which of course we do because we play full contact and the same version of rugby as as our male counterparts. So being able to show them footage of the games and show them that, well, actually it's just as good is is pretty good. I think personally the biggest one for this is just to believe in yourself. If you believe that you're good enough to be doing what you want to do, then just go into that wholeheartedly and don't really listen if anybody has any other opinions other than that you're good enough to do it. Another big one there I think is also to surround yourself with similar people. If there's any other women and girls in that sort of position, just to surround yourself with like-minded people who also share that aspiration. So the third question, I quite like this one. I think it's within rugby, as much as I'd love to, there are biological differences between men and women, obviously. So I think, as much fun as it might be, it's probably a bit of a stretch if you consider the safety elements. But I mean, in terms of non-contact sports, I think there's definitely big potential there. For example, there's England's touch rugby, where there's male sides, there's women's sides, and there's also mixed sides. So quite often in that touch rugby world, you'll have both men and women competing alongside and against each other there, which is fantastic, really. And I know that a lot of people know that the touch rugby world is purely about skill. So if you're good enough to make it, regardless of your gender there, then you're doing something right. So growing up, I had a couple due to maybe exposure on women's football and women's rugby when the 2014 World Cup was on. So um, when I used to play football, I looked up to Kelly Smith quite a lot, who was I think she was the England captain. She was striker for England around 2010, 2011, a legend of the women's football game. And when I first saw women's rugby on television, my biggest inspiration there was Emily Scarrett, who plays in the centres, because I also play in the centres. Um, but obviously, there's other people such as Serena Williams, people who have absolutely dominated their respective sports for over the past couple of years. I think they have a lot of respect in my eyes. Yeah. Oh, and I think probably worthwhile mentioning that yeah, one of my inspirations is one of my teammates, Katie Dale McLean, World Cup captain and World Cup winner in 2014. So I think if I didn't mention her, I'd probably be a little bit silly. But in terms of favourite, I don't necessarily think I have a favourite, but I do have a lot of respect for a lot of individual sportswomen across the sporting world, because I know how hard that these individuals will have had to work to get to that position, to be so successful, and the hard work and dedication that it takes to get to that level. Um, I would like to challenge the opportunities that are provided to both boys and girls within the sporting world, and also men and women in the sporting world. I think we can do so much more to promote girls and women in these male-dominated sports and to give them the same opportunities and the same platform to play at the best standard, and also extending that to giving the highest level within these sports the same opportunities and the same outreach that their male counterparts might have. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to to my speech, and thank you very much for those questions. I really enjoyed answering those. Certainly made me think a little bit.